Welcome to everyone joining us for the first international event in our public programme for Yorkshire Sculpture International this summer. My name is Jane Boyru. I am the producer for Yorkshire Sculpture International. I use the pronoun she, her. I am mixed race, with shortish dark brown hair, wearing a white shirt, and joining you from my home in Leeds with blue walls and books behind me. Before we begin, I wanted to introduce Yorkshire Sculpture International, which is a unique collaborative project between Henry Moore Institute and Leeds Art Gallery in Leeds, and the Hepworth Wakefield and Yorkshire Sculpture Park in Wakefield. The partnership celebrates Yorkshire as the home of sculpture in the UK. Supported by funding from Arts Council England, Leeds 2023 and Wakefield Council, we have a series of new commissions this summer, 2021. We are delighted to be working with Ariel René Jackson for our international project this year for the development of their new film, A Welcoming Place, which is a co-commission with Women in Their Work in Austin, Texas. Tonight, Ariel will premiere the trailer for this new work, A Welcoming Place, and be in conversation with the artist Kearra Amaya Gopee. Welcome, Ariel René Jackson. Ariel, born 1991, is a Black film-based artist whose practice considers land and landscape as sites of internal representation. Themes of transformation are embedded in their interest and application of repurposed imagery and objects, video, sound, and performance. Jackson's work is heavily influenced by their Afro-Creole Louisiana heritage, Black American cultural language. Jackson is currently working towards 2 solo exhibitions in Austin, Texas. We Are the Hackers Baby, Hackers Are We, at Big Medium in October 2021, and A Welcoming Place at Women in Their Work Gallery in January 2022. In this work, A Welcoming Place, they employ meteorological aesthetics and language as an allegory for oral narratives in a multi-channel video installation. Excerpts from each conversation culminate in a video aided by visuals produced in the Austin area, highlighting sites where freedom communities once stood, and an animation appropriating film archives about the weather balloon, a carrier for a mechanism that collects information about the local weather. Jackson graduated with their Masters of Fine Art at University of Texas at Austin in 2019 and received their Bachelors of Fine Arts at the Cooper Union in 2013. They are counted among the many alumni that have attended the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture and the Royal College of Exchange program at the Royal College of Art. Jackson's work has been exhibited nationally at various galleries and institutions throughout the United States, such as Dallas Contemporary, Jacob Lawrence Gallery in Seattle, the Contemporary Art Center in New Orleans, the DePaul Art Museum in Chicago, the Rhode Island School of Art and Design Museum, and the Studio Museum in Harlem, among others. We are also excited to introduce Kearra Amaya Gopee. Welcome, Kearra. Kearra Amaya Gopee is an antidisciplinary visual artist from Carapachima, Kayari, the larger of the twin island nations known as Trinidad and Tobago, living and working on Tongva land, Los Angeles, California. Their research-based practice focuses on violence as it exists is enacted on the Anglophone Caribbean and its diasporas. These histories, the immediate and their possible afterlives, are rendered elastic and atemporal, leaving ample room for their re-articulation. They hold a BFA in Photography and Imaging from New York University and are an alumni of the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. Currently, they are an MFA candidate at University of California, Los Angeles. I will now hand over to you both to introduce yourselves and begin the conversation and premiere the trailer. Thank you both.
Hello, and thank you, Jane, for that great introduction for both Kearra and I. I'll start off with my introduction and then I'll hand it off to Kearra. My name is Ariel René Jackson. I am a film-based artist based in Austin, Texas, in the United States. I identify as a Black American with Afro-Creole Louisiana heritage. My skin tone is light brown. I have a short haircut with kind of orange top, colored pattern top. My background is blurred, but I'm sitting in my home studio in Austin, Texas.
Hello, my name is Kearra Amaya Gopee. I am dark skinned, wearing a yellow bandana, glasses, headphones, and in my background there's several shelves and some plushies. Yeah. And pronouns are they, them.
Yes. My pronouns are they, them. I embrace her when I get it. And I'm really happy to be here with my longtime friend, colleague, co-superstar, extravagance, like my colleague, Kearra Amaya Gopee. We met in 2016 through a collective gathering of Black women artists led by Simone Lee, who is going to be the first Black female artist representing the US in the Venice Biennale next year. And in 2016, she was an artist in residence at the New Museum in New York City. And there she hosted a series of meetings. And so Kearra and I worked together in this very large group of Black female artists. And together we generated a celebration of both joy and grief. And since then, we've been supporting each other, eating each other's bacon.
Not the bacon. Yes, the bacon.
I always remember. I'm not going to out you, but I just...
Already done it? Oh, I was like...
And so I'm really a fan of Kearra's practice. This is why I asked them to come and talk to me, because I really admire how your practice embraces change through its modularity. And I feel like one of the things that you do to create this work is by facilitating research and poetry through your relationships and vice versa. There's a connection between all of these. And so I would consider us both storytellers in a sense, like that we spin, we weave, and we massage narratives that are not really concerned with being linear. And so in a lot of ways, even though neither of us went to school for this, I would consider us both visual poets.
I could take that.
Right?
I could take that. Yeah, I could take that.
But just to be clear, there are people who go to school for this, so.
Yeah, you're not stepping on your toes.
I'm saying people don't always go to school for art either, right? So
this is also true.
So these are just some of the reasons why our conversation today is important and relevant. We both exist in the North, South America. We're both like of the Americas.
Of the Americas, yeah.
Yeah, and we both have very different experiences that have intersected at a point in our life where I think we're both trying to figure out how we are able to encompass our entire humanity. And I believe that in times of revolution and upheaval and social unrest, poetry is really the thing that, I'll speak for myself, it really has offered me some comfort in the form of grieving, healing, and just bringing into focus what feels clear, but where no words are enough to describe, like no word on its own. So with that, I welcome this conversation.
No, I feel like it totally makes sense to me what you're saying about poetry and times of upheaval. Because, you know, I always used to be like, regarding poetry, I used to be like, what? The poets really do hate narrative, and I love fiction so much. And I could not understand for a long time, like, y'all think you're being very edgy about refusing narrative. Hey, we love a story, but then I realized it wasn't an assault on fiction. It's more like an assault on the narration of history per se, and having to escape the linear. Then in my head, I was just like, why don't they just say that? Why don't they just say that? Especially since some people don't even get to have narrative to begin with. So yeah, I think of us both as visual poets in that way, as you frame it, because we're just both kind of working with holding several things concurrently, holding several truths concurrently. And to work through poetry, work through image is one of the most capable ways of doing that. But yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to just say that, like, I've noticed a very similar thing with myself where some would call me a hypocrite because I love a nicely told story, specifically horror. And, you know, I love all the things that go into creating this reality. But when it comes to art, I love poetry. Let me just sink into what I'm seeing and experiencing. And so, even though many would think that, like, I try to make movies, I really don't. I don't necessarily, I struggle with calling myself a filmmaker. I wouldn't call myself a filmmaker. I would say that I'm a film artist only because the way I define film is that you are looking at one image. And for me, video is like you're using the ability of having several different perspectives.
Yeah, no, I totally hear that too, because the other day I was talking to our mutual friend Elliot, and I was telling him how much I don't like being called like a filmmaker per se. Mostly because it's a separate craft, but also I feel as if I don't want to be trapped within the expectations of the filmic as we understand it. Like, one can study it, but I don't think it's necessarily what I'm engaged with. But I also hate video. But I also hate, since we're speaking about hypocrisy, I also dislike the frame. I dislike video. So I'm thinking about different ways to frame a practice too, you know, like as I'm talking to you now. But what do you think about that? Like,
Okay. So I don't like video that is longer than it needs to be. And if it is as long as it needs to be, what experience is it giving me? What am I asked to consider as I'm listening? Which I'm going to struggle with this project, A Welcoming Place, because it's a lot of conversation that I've had. I've interviewed 6 different Black creatives based in Austin, Texas, some who were born and raised and some who are transplants, but have lived there for a long time. And it's so much and it's good stuff. And so that's why I'm like, I think about artists like you and other artists like, you know, going back to Lorraine O'Grady and just like the importance of facilitating your work. And so one of those, I enjoy when video art allows itself to be as short as it needs to be, and then lets everything else flow out through these other mediums. Because to ask someone to sit down for 30 minutes to follow a nonlinear narrative, I'm not the audience for that. I'll just say that. I mean, and I guess, yeah, for me, I'm picky when it comes to video. I won't say that I don't like video. I'll say that I'm very picky because I don't think it's as easy as I think some people might think. You know, poetry is not as easy as someone might think.
No.
Not every line is going to hit. You know, not every scene is going to hit. You know, you are curating. And, you know, not every show is a hit.
Every show is a hit.
Yeah.
But it's just like, yeah, the trick with like working with a lot of people and you wanting to like having to the responsibility of working with a whole bunch of people. Like I want to know how that has been for you as you're working through this, because as I work through a similar type of project, because usually I work with a lot of people in the background but not in the foreground of the work, you know what I mean? So also working in this way where it's in working through interviews, working through holding people's personal histories. How have you been navigating that? How have you been holding that in this work?
Thank you for asking me that. It's been, I think I've gone through 3 different methods of how to go about this. One of them being consistent throughout the whole time. That one is when I'm dealing with interviews. Like consent, and also like the focus of the work becomes so much about their consent, and also a balance of me not owning their perspective. Because I think that a lot of times when people incorporate interviews into their projects, it's very easy to come off as exploitative. How do you care for that which you're exploiting? Because it is sort of what's happening. A bit of transparency though is that I do my best to pay residuals. I have to live too, but I also think it's important not to just see people's experiences as a one-off, because each time it's doing work, and I feel that it is only fair to compensate people for that. So that makes promoting this work long. I can't just pull some choice words if they don't resonate. I can't, and sometimes I have to wait. I mean, I did these interviews a year ago. And I'm glad I did them early on, because I feel like I'm able to look at them very fresh. Because I think as an interviewer, you have to give yourself space. And a lot of times, for me, it's just been about time. Yeah. Like if it doesn't sit right with me, I have some footage from when I was in West Africa. That's been the hardest footage to consider working with, because I understand the power dynamics of me being an American. And so in this case, these are people who I've been in conversation with, in community with, for a longer time, since 2017 about. We've been in the same social circles. Some of them are mentors, some of them are very close friends. So I think for me in doing these projects, it's not so much about just finding a roster of people, but finding people who I have a relationship with, because a welcoming place is a lot about care, and how Black people care for each other through the relationships that we develop when we go from place to place. So anyway, that's about the interviewing thing. That's consistent. The other aspect of working with people. All right, there's two types. So on one hand, there were some great moments where I knew exactly what I wanted. I knew what the vision was, and I had all the slides down, and showing people like, this is the shot. We're going from here to here. That's it. We got the, and then on the other side, with some more organic stuff that is more about, I need you to get this piece to a certain point to where I can jump in. So for instance, what you'll see in the video that we show today, there's 2 processes that I'm using where I worked with somebody else, where they didn't just like shoot, but they were actually part of the making of the work. So that's the stop motion animation and the miniature landscape. And both of those, I use the same person, Hannah Alpert. We went to undergrad together. They were my pandemic person. So we was like the only people we were seeing. And so I would hand off some frames for Hannah to paint after my direction of like paint here and here. So that's pretty simplistic. And that was very helpful because animation is very tedious. And so I've had to consider like which parts are tedious and which parts require my creative sensibility. Because working for another artist in the past, there is a very fine line before people are making your work for you, like in a creative sense. And I think what this process has shown me is like which steps are going to take away from the amount of time I need to think about how careful I need to be, like thinking about the purpose behind the project or the purpose behind the gesture and all of this stuff. And so those things, I will hand that over to someone else. With the miniature, it was a bit slippery because there's a cutting phase, which you'll see on video. There's a cutting phase, a shaping phase. That's pretty important for me to do. So it ended up being a reverse where I was more necessary on the forefront. And then my friend assisted in creating some of the textures that I want. Yeah. So like I was able to shape the landscape and they were able to come in and provide some of that detail. So
wait, but on that note, then you want to run the tape or?
Yeah, let's run the tape. I don't really have any. Yeah, maybe we'll just edit out that part. Right here.
A letter to the Black tradition of forecasting. Dear rolling hills and sunbeams kissing my neck. A hell of a drive. Doesn't prepare me for my heart sinking when I arrive. A statue peeking through flora and fauna greets me, my knuckles white, temples pulse, and throat pressing down onto my stomach.
My name is Cindy Elizabeth. I was born in Austin at Brackenridge Hospital, which no longer exists. I've lived here all my life, and I'm about to be 33 years old. Oftentimes, I find myself in places where I'm supposed to be collaborating with people when I hear things like, oh, the East Austin used to be so unsafe. You couldn't come over here 10, 15 years ago. You wouldn't dare come over here on this side of the highway. And they're talking to me as if right. I'm not someone who's from the community. And so, and so, what I just started saying was like, well, I grew up here and it was safe for me. I grew up here and I never had any issues. I grew up here and I was actually protected. I grew up here and people looked out for me. I grew up here and I was free. I grew up here and I had a great upbringing, safe upbringing.
I began looking for myself in the welcoming eyes of my elders, my sisters, my brothers. You who have taken temperature when language was shaped and made abstract. The air we hold rises to breathe heights because of you.
Let's see, I've lived in Austin now for 27 years. Born, South Side, Chicago, pretty much lived, worked there. Didn't leave there really until the early 90s and stopped by a couple of years in Georgia and then came to Austin. No homes, no residents, no nothing. Everything was boarded up. It was kind of derelict and had been since the late 60s, early 70s. It was just a place where, prostitution and dealing and all that kind of stuff went on. And then the police left that area alone because there were no stakeholders on 11th Street. So when I started doing that is when that money first started coming in, and meaning that they start digging up the street and putting in new sewer lines and so on. And to me, that's when I personally knew that it was going to go past revitalization pretty fast. When I tell people when they revitalize things, they do cosmetic things. They build new structures. They do some things there. When they start digging up the infrastructure, they're not doing that for us. New sewer line, entire new civic infrastructure means that it's going another way.
We experience death at high altitude, weather balloons releasing whispers into the sky. From home lessons, we transmit measurements of pressure in atmospheres colonized, tethered to memories of your not so long ago, touching gravity at the end of hope. As children, you told us to breathe deeply, to point our chests in the north direction. We learned quickly that in place of flesh, resume flight with black rubber, carrying narrative ensembles of motion synonymous with whispers etched into the back of our necks.
So Kearra, I've been like waiting to hear what you are thinking about this.
No, you really did that. The scale of this is wild. I don't even know where to start. Honestly, like, when the show opening again? Remind the people.
It's in January 2022.
We're catching flights.
Please. Oh my gosh.
Because
Please.
what you're doing, wow. Now I have to let that sit for a little bit.
Please, I would love that. I would love that so much. Oh, don't make me cry on this. Listen, I'm like looking at plane tickets to be in Venice because I can just see a sea of Black women being there for Simone. I can see it. And that to me is church. I'm not religious, but that to me is church. Like, I'm like, I gotta go. I've never felt like I had to be somewhere so badly. And so I just get misty eyed when I hear you.
No, it's very much pilgrimage, like the ways that we have to kind of, like, I don't really identify as a woman, but people try to lump me in there, but shout out to y'all. But like the way that we show up for each other.
So
it's always pilgrimage, it's always this thing of immense reverence. And yeah, I feel like you would travel for me the same way I would travel for you, the way you would travel for Simone.
I really want to be better at that, at reserving the funds to be able to be there for each other. I feel like, we sent each other questions beforehand. We've had time to mull about it. So I don't think it's necessary for us to go to them one by one, but just how we feel.
Yeah.
And so I just keep thinking about the third one, your second and third one, about how forecasting as a risk assessment tool, which I really appreciate that, influence migration patterns within the African diaspora, because you're talking about pilgrimage. And I feel that increasingly so, as the world has become more and more globalized, it's I don't really feel called to a very specific place, but I do look for a community that doesn't have to necessarily exist where I am, but where, but in these spaces where I'm needed. Yeah, really, that's how. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I'm thinking about it. How you, like for me personally, community is definitely less about where I am, for sure, the same way that you think about it. Like my whole life, I'm very much a migratory bird in that sense, where the people that anchor me are all over the place. And isn't that just like the story of Black migration in general? I think about our relationship as people who are of the South, in a sense. I'm thinking about the kind of sidekick kind of migration that has happened between us, aside from the physical one as well. I'm thinking about how narratives of like forecasting how even we look at things that have happened to people in like Trinidad and people in the Caribbean, how we look at things happening to people in the South of America, people in America, Black people in America in general, and the ideas that we pull from there in terms of how we communicate with each other and also navigate with like a world that is constantly trying to kill you. What tactics we pull from each other, how do we care for each other? And I've seen conversation through literature, but through literature, through text, but just even interpersonally, how that work is happening all the time. But yeah, that's for me is a type of forecasting for sure, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I feel that A Welcoming Place came out of this desire. And this was something you and I wanted to do when we first, you remember that?
The Green Book situation? Yes, the Green Book situation. That was my bad. I accept that. Look.
Wait, we got to explain to the people. Okay.
Go ahead.
So I'm going to paraphrase based on what we looked up. But the Green Book, for our European audience, the Green Book was a navigation tool in that it was a book of places that would welcome traveling Black families, Black individuals, just anyone who was Black, or, you know, saw themselves as, I don't know, I'm sure brown people were using this too.
Oh, yeah.
But Black people generated this book called the Green Book, and it helped them to identify safe places that they could go, that they knew they wouldn't be chased out. And so you have that counteracting a history of what's called the sundown towns, where there are, and they still exist today, but it's unofficial. And I think that's the key word here, is that it was an unofficial way of marking towns that were racist in that they also had unofficial ways of telling people that if you exist in this town, if you stay in this town past sundown, we're going to try to take your life. And that is the American narrative, I think, specifically the US, but I think it could be argued to be a similar structure of having your official rules and then your unofficial rules, and tactics and strategies. So Kearra and I wanted to create a modern day Green Book in New York City. We was dreaming big while we was
dreaming big, you know. Look, some things happen and some things don't happen, but we learn along the way, and that's what counts. And that's what counts.
I think we both took that as a little nugget, and it has developed in very different ways, but I definitely feel like it had paved the way for me to think about how my practice could be more than me figuring out how I feel about the world. And also, I think between 2016 and now, I've learned a lot about how you cannot get through being oppressed every day by yourself.
No.
And you have to have a collective, and thank goodness for technology, because without it, I mean, I'm just amazed at how this idea of forecasting is just incredibly prevalent on TikTok, on Instagram. I mean, some say it would be gossip and fear mongering, but I would say that it's a process that has always been happening, and it found a new vehicle. And thank goodness it did, because I feel like having cameras for counter surveillancing is like a real thing. And part of that surveillancing, what I mean by counter surveillancing is that while the government or while oppressive systems are watching you, as a
you're
form
also
of
watching them.
You're also watching them. You're also watching them. And I feel like, I mean, the youth are just like getting it all on tape and forcing people to have the conversation that people had been trying to get the world to consider. So yeah.
No, as I bring up technologies now, I'm thinking about like how those technologies are also under constant threat, just looking at how Instagram constantly like changes their algorithms to suppress, anything that has to do with our caring for ourselves, in the face of, surveillance to begin with, anything to deal with mutual aid, anything to deal with what is quote unquote legal or unlegal work, quote unquote, illegal work, how difficult they make it for you to counter surveil, which is a testament to the strength of counter surveillance. And I think that we will always find a way to counter surveil, essentially. Like TikTok is where the kids are. The kids are doing their thing more. So the kids need to be mindful. Kids need to be mindful. And I do worry for their safety sometimes with the things that they be putting out. And, with the protests last year, the uprising, I feel as if there was a lot of really good information going around in terms of how one protects themselves digitally online, how one protects themselves from, while doing this work, how to make sure that you are safe and that you can be tracked. So yeah, I'm just thinking about all of that in tandem with what you're saying here now. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like that's the critical information that allows us to exist somewhat safely in a lot of these areas, because I've been thinking a lot about whether or not I should be trying to move to a more predominantly Black city and what it means for me to stay where I am in a predominantly white city. And I've been seeing more and more people just talk about how necessary it is for us to be everywhere. And so then it led me to think, well, how can we protect each other if we're so far apart? And, we've, like you said, we've always found a way. We've used, I say we as in the Black diaspora has used fabric. We've used, just like visual language, looking at each other, nodding at each other. There's all these different ways. And I think it's going to be increasingly important, like after this show is done, for me to consider one of these questions that you're suggesting of like, how is this going to look on a global scale? Like in what area? Because for this project, A Welcoming Place, I was thinking a lot about the history of places and really inspired by driving up through Oklahoma to Arkansas. And just thinking to myself, I'm like, man, this is so beautiful. And then in the back of my head, thinking like, I bet you so many people have been lynched in this area. Like just, thinking of hard realities. That's not something that I dig for. It's just something that as you become more knowledgeable of US history, you would know that. And so it was a combination of that, like the physicality of just being in a very beautiful space, while also like, knowing what has occurred there and you're not able to actually point it out, aside from talking to people. And the essay that I sent you frames my main inspiration for making general idea of forecasting based on being in New Orleans just before and after Hurricane Katrina, and how the news is saying one thing and the Black community is saying another thing. And then the question of like, well, should we believe in gossip because Trump? And it's become a very, I think, difficult. I think it's necessary for us to be clear about the language of how we're using gossip, because I think it's very different from what people might think of when it comes to fake news. And so I feel that by turning towards a metaphor, turning towards an analogy, I feel like that can begin to create a infrastructure.
Yeah. No, I'm hearing that because I feel like the essential difference between fake news and gossip to me is the quotidian. I.e., we quote unquote gossip to pass time, we quote unquote gossip to share news interpersonally within a small space. Mm-hmm. And we also share information that is verifiable often. Exactly. Yeah. We have methods for verification. You hear something, you don't believe it, you go down and you see it for yourself. You hear something, you don't believe it, you go to your neighbor who you know and you ask them, did you see XYZ? I heard XYZ. Can you confirm? I will corroborate evidence in particular ways. And that's every day. Yeah. That's every day. Fake news is a calculated thing, which is also easily verifiable as untrue. But because of the platform and because it's on such a large platform that people have been conditioned to trust in a particular type of way, it's like, yeah, that's word, that's law. But no, you still have to ask questions. Like gossip is always going with hand in hand with questions. It never just sits by itself. But yeah.
Yes. I latched on to what you said about fake news being easily verified to be false, whereas gossip within communities that are discussing what's safe and unsafe is usually verified to be correct. And I mean, in terms of the Hurricane Katrina, there are articles out there that are like, yeah, people kept saying this story and then dismissing various people coming forward with very similar, notions of what went on, if there was a bomb or not, or, and whether or not that was something that they actually heard. Right then, there is also a history. And so all that is dismissed because of the way that it's phrased. Whereas then an article comes out in New York Times, I believe, where the New York Times outed the Army Corps of Engineers, saying that they actually did not do a great job. So Black people, even though the story was told through a kind of paraphrasing of events, long events that have happened over a span of years, that's dismissed. And it's not about it necessarily being replaced by facts. It's the fact that it's not even considered to be part of something to consider as being like, well, we should look further. It's the dismissal that encapsulates white supremacy because of where it's coming from. And so part of the reason why, my interviews are not face, you don't see the actual person, but you hear their voices, because I think people get too hung up on the visuals of the person that they're seeing. They get too hung up in well, I'm going to decide now that I don't believe anything you're saying, and I'm going to dismiss everything you're saying because of how I perceive you. And I feel like that's a barrier. Of course, you can make all kinds of assumptions based on someone's voice, but taking that element away, and I don't have the words for this. I feel like it will become more apparent in both of our practices of what is the third, what is the outcome of hearing these voices, seeing these images, like the image with the text. I mean, both of us will probably do more and more research onto what that means to be in relationship to each other. But from an African diasporic perspective. And I think it's going to be interesting to see, how that language shifts in terms of how it's being used. I struggle with, when people think about art, it's like, well, what is the art doing? And we talked about how poetry functions earlier, but I've been thinking a lot about how film and video function, because anything that's on film and video is not meant to match reality. It's just not. Even if it's a documentary, it's not. because we don't take reality the same way that we take what's being told to us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now I'm thinking about it and I'm wondering about like where documentary practices, or even like thinking through like what you're saying right now about it's not fundamentally going to be reality. Like where does that, like what is the relationship that people will then have to that? How do people make sense of that? How do people weave that into their lives? How do people take this as something that is not simply one person's perspective, even though it's including multiple voices? The editing process. How do people trust the editing process? How do we make that something that is, radiating a type of trust within the correct communities or the relevant communities?
That's an important question. Very important question. I don't think that this video work can facilitate any of that. I don't think, and that's why it's made in the way that it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm figuring that out, whether or not I believe in a degree of clarity in the video itself, but what's going to hopefully build a trust with my audience is facilitating an archive of these conversations in full. There's many Black people whose stories are just never told. I know that sounds cliche to say, but it's painfully true. I'm more saying this for our audience than for you and I, but it's painfully true. And I feel that when I do interviews, I'm asking people to rehash their life experiences that do include trauma to a degree. But what you'll see if you tune in for the show is that there are moments of joy that I ask them about, because I think that's incredibly important. But it's not to dismiss the real pain and trauma that is experienced. And I hope that these conversations will inspire more people to record conversations. I think that's the most powerful thing that we can do, is to archive ourselves in the tradition of Graham O'Grady, and to give ourselves permission to be poetic like Simone Lee, and to have this question, this concern with interiority as a reflection of society, which there's many Black artists that are prevalent right now that are grappling with all of these things, with narratives, with self-projection. Because if we're not going to be in the future, this shit is going to happen again. I'm sorry, can I curse?
I think you could cuss. Honestly, I'm as if I work at YSI, but I think you could cuss.
Thanks, Kearra.
What's language?
What's language? What is language? It's such a funny thing. I think that's why I love poetry. It's more concerned with how it sounds. Of course, the picture you're painting, but it's how it sounds.
But then there's also poetry that I enjoy that is not is unsayable. Like it goes back into the question. There's some poetry, like if you read Song by Nobel Philip, like how do you say it? How do you encapsulate that? How does it sit in the mouth, like the breath of what is being said? And sure, you could break it down into phonetics, but how does it sit in the mouth? How does it sit in the body?
Yes. I'm trying to think of one of my favorite poets, and I have their books in a closet. Y'all can edit this. I'll be right back. Wait. That book. See me looking around. Oh man, who is this? She's, let me see. I feel so bad for not remembering her name.
No.
I know.
Sometimes it be like that.
I mean, Claudia Rankin's great, but
But not her.
The Door to No Return. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes. Not Dion.
Yeah, Dion.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Dion Brand.
The icon.
The icon. I feel so ashamed.
No shame in that. Look, we still in a pandemic. Memory fails.
For real. I had her in my head because I aspire for her hairstyle. It's magnificent.
Come on the basis of pure aesthetics. What she does on the page, but also what she does with the
with the aesthetics on and off the page.
Consistency. And I enjoy that.
I do too. So the reason why I brought up Dion Brand is a Canadian poet, but she's
Trini.
Yeah, she's originally from Trinidad, but I don't know if she was born there. But
yes, she was.
Oh, thank you. So the reason why I always think about Dion Brand is because in her series of writings, she will go back and forth from giving you a very intimate stanza about just, something that she remembered from her youth. And then right after that, she'll spend time talking about how the hummingbird always knows how to get home.
Mm-hmm.
And aside from there being this relationship to nature, I feel like Dion Brand method of writing is like an editor, like a video editor. Because you're you're jumping all over the place and it all connects. I just think that's so exciting because, I just think it's so exciting. I think that...
The Blue Cloak. Go ahead, sorry.
Go ahead, what?
No, have you read The Blue Cloak as well? The Blue Cloak. I think that's the last one she did, which is essentially her talking to herself, her editor self. She's talking to her left-hand notes. Yeah, so you're 10,000% correct in that she is working in that way at all times.
That is so exciting. I debate on whether or not go back to school to be a poet, and then I just don't want to go back to school.
And then don't go back to school. Simply, school is over. I say as I'm in school, but school is over. I'm trying to get as many people to not go to school as possible. Save your money. Be an autodidact.
You're right. I'm looking for this new book, but we still doing this. So.
Yeah.
I really want to find this new book you're talking about because, I'm just so excited. I'm excited about just how splintered realities are being embraced.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that was always the case. I know definitely you and I were just coming out of undergrad and just feeling like we had to call ourselves one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I say film-based. But you say anti-disciplinary. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about that. How'd you come to that?
Do you not see me here telling people don't go to school? Don't go to school. Disciplines, the idea of disciplines is restrictive and made to corral thought into definite silos for professionalization. So it's just like when you think of oneself as anti-disciplinary, and discipline is the idea of disciplines to begin with, like if you go back to like classics, like it's racist to begin with, as everything is. But
I would say it's Catholic because of the discipline. I said I would say it's Catholic. It's like very Protestant Catholic, like discipline yourself.
Yeah. But even going all the way back to fucking classics when like the Catholicism wasn't even popping in Greece like that. Like it wasn't going off in Greece like that. The Romans wasn't having it. But not at that time. But yeah, I feel as if disciplines, yeah, we get trapped in disciplinary thinking often, and then even not just the word discipline, I'm not fond of, because it suggests like a disciplining of the self, disciplining of thought, disciplining like these like the dispelling of all things unruly. And I'm very pro unruly. I'm very pro wild expanse. I'm very pro tangent. I'm pro meandering. I'm pro wandering through thought and in other people's fields and thinking about things in a way that can hold multiple perspectives from like literally different places. So I'm off the discipline, I'm off the field, because I just don't want to feel like I should be studying one thing and that one thing doesn't belong in this field per se. This field shouldn't exist to begin with. So yeah, everything is in this field. We just find different ways to cause speculation in different fields. Speculation of money, speculation of art, speculation of gender. It's all speculation under different names. So why not put it all in one place?
Yeah, I appreciate you putting a name to that, because that's exactly how I feel about each project.
Mm-hmm.
The film-based part of my practice is what gives me permission for myself. Do whatever. I say do whatever, but do whatever feels relevant. Mm-hmm. Like me making a miniature landscape felt very relevant for this project, where, I mean, for one, being in Austin, and that is the landscape. Two, I think about how can I create a series of visuals that will allow for Black and Brown audience to imagine. And to imagine in terms of having control in ways that we do not. Because as much as people like to think of natural preservation, most of nature was made by man in the sense that like mountains have been shaped. We create our surroundings constantly, even if it is on a very micro place. And I guess what I'm thinking about is placemaking. That's not to be misconstrued with the fact that companies are really the ones destroying the earth. I'm not talking about climate change. I'm talking about, in general, like our relationship to the land, like in terms of just the globe, and how we are interconnected. And I forgot what I was going to say. I think that's what I was.
Yeah, no, that's literally what you were saying.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
How are we doing?
I think we're good. I think we're good. Honestly, I think.
I'm so excited.
I will say fact check me on the history of disciplines, but yeah.
That's so hilarious.
Feel free to put a caption at the bottom saying the Catholics were in fact running the show. Please.
Catholics were in fact the reason.
Oh my God.
I mean, we talked about everything that I really wanted to talk about, and I feel very affirmed.
Good.
by you. We were talking before about like the competition between artists and how ridiculous that is. And so I'm really grateful that you and I have continued to support each other's practices, because we are interested in very similar things. But I think that the way that we're exploring our practices, it makes for a wider lens. You know what I mean?
And then also like thinking through our practices in that way, like the way that we think through our practices, like it just opens, it confirms to me a little bit that certain modalities are useful in illustrating some shared histories that may not be like on paper shared histories, but the methods with which we combat being unseen in particular ways, being unseen but very much seen within our personal communities. The fact that we have like similar approaches to that is really much more of a testament to me than an affront.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think of it as an affront at all. I'm just kind of like, oh, we're developing a canon, we're developing language.
Yes. I mean, that is, if we want to get into art history, I mean, that's series of people who were doing the same thing.
Period.
Together to have more and more conversations about those things, expanding it to a point where they become disciplined. No, I'm joking. They become. I'm joking.
Canonically sound.
No, but I mean, you know, I think it's incredibly exciting because I think what we're doing is we're offering and we're generating and we're creating spaces where people can draw connections.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like making think tanks that also serve as archives.
Yep.
And I think that's why neither of us can do this alone. Like I do envision, I see for both of us having a team of people who believe in the beauty of making art, for the art experience, as well as like the importance of documenting.
Mm-hmm.
I've become more and more concerned with that. And I find that motivates me in my practice in terms of like, how do I take care of this practice?
Yeah.
And how do I take care of the people who are involved in this practice? And I think working for an artist, I work for Deborah Roberts, who's also based in Austin, Texas. I think that's what I've learned working with her, because she does have assistants. She's been at this for a very long time, to the point where she knows where she needs to put her energy. Mm-hmm. You know, the older you get, you start running out of energy. So you have to be able to
get efficient with it.
Get efficient with it and figure out where is my energy most needed. And I identify myself as an as a socialist artist, because I believe that every opportunity, especially when it comes to commissions, is an opportunity to, you know,
run somebody else,
to provide support. Mm-hmm. And so I'm excited about this body of work. I do call it a body of work. There's like 3 or 4 videos in that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Work.
A body of work, notwithstanding the entire sculpture that went into this, the animation. Yeah, it's a body of work, hon. It's a body of work.
Thank you. Well, you know, some people look at video and they're like, oh, this artist has 3 videos. I'm like, you mean they got like 12 works
but
showcased? You know, I would love to get to the point where, you know, I get a similar support for having the physical space. That's really important to me. I know it's important to you. I had the privilege of being able to curate your wonderful work into a digital space last year around this time, I think.
Yeah, it was around this time. That's funny.
Yeah. And and having, I think, you know, just your work is always so, how can I say, it feels very warm, your work. Yes, it feels very warm. And I think about the staircase that you built for that show a lot. It will stick with me in the same way that many of these poems stick with me. And I feel like in that way, our work, it's going, I mean, not only our work, but our career is very long-term.
Oh, yeah.
Because the method, I mean, the work that we're making is meant to be long-term. It's not, hopefully it won't be, you know, like, oh, this is the artwork that was made today, but, you know, during this time. But like, I think that what we're doing is creating reprieves. Mm-hmm. Is that the right word? Reprieves, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. definitely. No, no shade to the people who make. Oh, go ahead. I'm good. Okay, we done. I'm good.
Oh no, I didn't want to cut the discussion short. It's so fascinating. Thank you. Do carry on. I can disappear.
No.
I'm just doing
No, it's fine. I'm good.
I can listen to you both for hours. Thank you, Ariel and Kearra. It's been really fascinating. You've both been so open, and it's been really, really compelling to hear you talk together, and clearly a really long supportive friendship between you both too. So thank you for letting us have an insight into both of your practices, and sort of that sense of collective and understanding is just really shines through. And Ariel, wow, like as Kearra said, the work looks incredible. I can't wait to see the finished work, but thank you, my goodness, thank you for sharing with us all you've achieved so far, and to see the sculptural element as well, and to hear the very beautiful language, very poetic as well. I just look forward to hearing more. The stills that you've sent us were wonderful in themselves, to see everything coming together, and with the drawn painting elements as well. It's a gesundheit's work, really. Ariel, congratulations.
Thank you.
Love to hear about what you were talking about as your love of poetry, and your kind of role as visual poets and storytellers. I found really fascinating too. And also the provocation you gave us, Kearra, about the anti-disciplinary. Thank you. That's a lot to think about too during this time. So just to finish off, thank you both. Thank you so much from Yorkshire Sculpture International, Ariel. It's been great to be on this part of the journey with you. I know my colleagues across the partnership have really enjoyed the conversations that we've had, and we look forward to seeing your work when it's finished, and hopefully to more international collaborations. Wish we could be in Austin, Texas in January. And just to flag up that we have our next event and a public program is Wando Ibezi's commission at the Hepworth Wakefield, which is opening on the 21st of August. And our hashtag is YSI 2021. So thank you to everyone who's joined us. And good luck, Ariel. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.